Hello, wonderful audience. Good morning. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about oppression and privilege in my report, Oppression and Privilege and Analysis of Unforeseen Opportunity. So, in our world, which is increasingly globalized and increasingly diverse, each person is born into the world in a completely different set of circumstances. The dealer, known as the world or birth, hands each person a unique set of cards that completely determines the way we interact with the world and the way we interact with our surroundings. These things such as sexual orientation, gender, race, personality, hair color, possibly anything you can really think of affect the way that we interact with the world and affect the way that others perceive the way we interact with the world. So this in mind, we can look to how this affects us specifically. Unequal opportunity for people of different circumstances means that there's an unequal perception of people amongst the world. So while this might not be the easiest conclusion to initially jump to or to grasp, an experiment done by an unnamed elementary school teacher, as shown in this picture above, can show you how that works. So basically what he did was he took all of his students, and when they first walked into the classroom, he asked them all to ball up a piece of paper and try and shoot it into the trash can in the front of the room. While initially this sounded like a fun experiment, basketball-esque style, with the prospect of a reward if you made it, the students in the back of the classroom over time began to notice that they had a much lower chance of making the shot than the students in the front. And since this was determined based merely on the seating chart, which they were unable to control, they felt that there was an unequal opportunity to earn the reward. So this is a good example of oppression and privilege in our world. The students in the back of the room would be the ones that are seen as oppressed, and students in the front of the room privileged. Oppression for some inherently creates privilege for others. So the students in the front of the room, though they're privileged in this situation, had there been no students in the back of the room, they would not be privileged, because the privilege that they have is created by the oppression, and the vice versa is the same as well. Oppression is created by privilege, privilege is created by oppression. And this system of privilege and oppression is even further intensified and drawn out by the fact that many privileged individuals are unable to initially recognize their personal benefits. So the students in the front of the classroom didn't really see a problem with this system of workings, as they were able to make their shots, get their reward, they were happy with it. But the students in the back of the classroom were the ones who were calling out saying, hey, this isn't fair, something needs to change. Students in the front of the classroom, what needs to change? This is fine, I'm having a perfectly fine time completing the task at hand. So this in mind, we can look further into the existence of privilege, as it's already been proven, but how does it change the world, and how does it change our identities and the way we actually interact with the world? So human identity is developed based on the way we storytell about ourselves, and this is taken straight from a study done by the psychological inquiry, meaning basically that the way you speak about yourself affects the way you see the world and affects the way others see you. You can't expect to have a positive personal image if you don't talk about yourself positively. If you're always being that person who drags themselves down, says, I can't do this, I'm not going to be able to complete this task, I'm going to fail this test, you're not going to be able to do it, you're going to fail that test, you're going to not be able to complete the task. You have to talk about yourself positively and look at your circumstances positively, no matter what they are, should you choose or should you be interested in dealing with them positively and seeking positive outcomes. In addition to that, kind of by the same notion, people are a product of their environment. The quality of our surroundings are determined based on the way we're willing to view them. So, for example, someone who lives a really happy life, has a good, positive, personal outlook on life, is probably going to be a much happier person, even if they only make $50,000 per year. If you make $200,000 per year, if you're still sad, have a bad outlook on life, say, I could always make more, I'm not happy with my life, you're not going to be as happy. Money and your surroundings do not determine the way you look at the world, but it's in fact how you look at the world that determine your happiness and your personal mental state. So this in mind, this can also be applied to the system of oppression and privilege. Assuming that the oppressed are willing to look through rose-colored lenses, there's definite room for improvement and personal benefits to that individual. So what are some examples of this in the real world? The feminist movement, for example. As pictured above, we can see the We Can Do It Rosie the Riveter poster, which is an iconic propaganda used during the World War II era. This was used mainly to propel women towards the workforce in a world that initially had been enforcing gender roles and female roles of domesticity. They wanted women to get into the workforce because men were becoming unavailable due to the fact that they were going to war. So while this is just a piece of propaganda, the point that we're trying to make here is that the oppressive system of enforced gender roles of the past created a more unified, solidified movement for the feminist movement, and it created a movement that was more persistent and able to be revived in future generations. Had women not been oppressed and enforced to the point that they were, they likely would not have come together in such a community. The community bonded them, and as also from the psychological inquiry says, whether it be tragic bereavement, oppression, anything, any form of injustice has been shown to not only yield consequences, but also to lead people to have higher levels of post-trauma personal adaptation. So this can be applied to women. Like I said, gender roles enforced. When gender roles are let down, then women are able to come together and in multiple eras, not just World War II era, come and move towards equality. The Asian American community also, after years of racism in the United States, through strict immigration quotas that were placed by various presidents and then eventually removed in the 19th century, or 20th century, excuse me, and internment, like Japanese internment, also during the World War era, over time, as racism has decreased and as Asians have been given more equal opportunity in American society, their income has risen, and now the Asian community now sees the highest average income returns over the general population by a margin of over 20%. And you can see that up here on this graph, 66,000 is the average median household income of Asians, as opposed to only about 50,000 for the general public, which is a wide margin. The African American community, on the other hand, some may point to as an outlier. After a long system of slavery and a lot of oppression throughout the past, they still seem to be more socially and economically disadvantaged. But this can kind of be chalked up more to the system of slavery, which still, though slavery does not exist, the system of oppression and unequal perception, I guess, has just led the African American community down a dark path that they are not able to get out of yet. The Eurocentric society of America that we live in still completely enforces the notion of white over black, and unfortunate as it is, other races have not been subject to this as much, but the African American community still has a long way to go because we do live in a Eurocentric society, and because of that slavery and the harsh system of the past, it really is going to be impossible to overcome until there are some changes within the white majority, which is unfortunate, but is the way that it's probably going to be in this country. So this system of privilege and oppression considered, what does this mean for our real world? What are solutions? There definitely seems to be a correlation between oppression and the ability to adapt to the world and the ability to improve after that oppression. But it relies on the willingness of the oppressed to see themselves in a situation where they are happy, I guess. Again, the rose-colored lenses phrase is perfect. If you're willing to look at the world in a positive light, you're going to see it in a positive light, and you're going to be willing and happy to improve upon that and to seek benefits wherever you can find them. So while this doesn't necessarily pose a specific solution, the best solution for a problem like oppression and privilege is firstly to educate not only the oppressed, but the privileged as well on the system of oppression and privilege, prove to a lot of people who may not believe in its existence that it does in fact exist, and to educate them about it. Educate them about how they can look at the world in a positive light even despite the suppression, and over time hopefully the suppression will fade as people look more towards benefits and less towards negatives. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We'll both ask you a question. How did you handle any differing perspectives within the state to reach any conclusion?
Could you define that with more specificity?
Were there any anybody opposing ideas, or
in your research process, did you see any opinions or statistics that challenge the ones you chose to use, that offered a different perspective or something disparate that didn't agree with some of the things that you said?
Yeah, I think that a lot of the perspectives that I have shown in my presentation actually are against the status quo and against what a lot of people kind of believe to be the situation. But the main point of argument against the conclusion that I've come to is basically that oppression oppresses those who are oppressed, and it's impossible to be overcome because they are in the situation that they're in. Like, they're in a lower circumstance, so oppression creates oppression. Does that make sense? But really, the whole point of what I've been trying to say is that if you're willing to look at that oppression with a positive light and see what can I do to overcome this, it exists, but what can I do to make the best circumstances out of where I'm at, it actually kind of ends up proving the argument, because oppression creates oppression, but what we're trying to do is look past that and look for changes for the future.
All right, thank you.
If you had more time to continue this research, what might be some of the more, what might you choose to look more into regarding this issue or this topic?
I think that I would like to look into more examples of oppressed and minority groups and how they've grown both socially, economically, politically over time after dealing with oppression and after not only dealing with oppression but oppressing other groups. And I would also, if I had the time, which I may continue in the next coming years, I would like to talk to people of past eras, possibly like older people who have actually gone through World War II era, for example, and hear how their perspective has developed after oppression. So maybe talk to someone who was interned in a camp during one of the World War eras and talk about how that perspective has changed them, because I think that a lot of people would actually say, well, they aren't happy and it was a horrible thing. It has changed the way they look at the world and has lended them a lot of benefits for dealing with trauma and adaptation in their future lives.
All right,
Thank you.